To Mend a Broken Heart, written by Myunique C. Narrated by Erma Boyd. Author's Notes. My story isn't all bad. At least that's what I will keep telling myself so that I can make it through. I've said for years that I'm just a girl with a story to tell and no one to listen. In the beginning, I wanted my story to be in chronological order. But the thing about that is, you'd have to sit through so many fuzzy memories. Instead, I'm going to write the memories as they come, and hopefully by the end, you'll see the whole picture. Although there is a chapter to correspond with every year of my life so far, it isn't written that way. I pulled 26 moments, 26 experiences that have shaped me and brought me to this place of acceptance. Going forward, I want to take the time out to thank the people who have meant so much to me through this journey. The people that were subjected to hear this story repeatedly just so I could get the tone right. I can never thank those people enough. My most heartfelt appreciation must go to my best friend who has been sticking with me on some of my worst days and still looks at me with the same twinkle whenever I enter the room. So many days are easier when you're around. I must admit that. I'd also like to say that the woman I am now cares very little about hurt feelings. I've been the poster child for self-pity and avoiding saying what's really on my mind for far too long. I know some people in my family are going to be upset. Some may cry. Some may say that I should have just kept this all bottled inside until I couldn't hold on to it any longer. They're okay to feel how they want to. As for me, I refuse to be an active volcano waiting to blow my top. The funny thing is that it was the screams that brought me to this conclusion. It was the panic attacks, the inability to sleep, and the horrible tension headaches that made me realize that I've had enough of holding it all in. Every scream was for the little girl inside, every tear. Every time I said, "I'm fine," just so that people would be okay with going back to treating me as if I'm invisible. I thought about naming this The Invisible Girl, and as you read, you'll know why. But as I sat and examined the memories and emotional scars, I knew that they weren't the makings of someone who was invisible, but of a girl who was just broken, in more ways than one. 1. All over the place. I don't think I've ever quite felt this way about someone before. It's so easy for me to lose myself in thoughts about the way he laughs and how he sways when he walks with that undeniable swagger. Sometimes I find myself just thinking about the soft brown of his eyes and the way that he would look at me when we were having good days. As much as I want to tell myself that there weren't, the truth is, there were a lot of good days. I would go so far as to say that what happened between us was my fault, that somehow I brought the pain I now feel upon myself. But I know that would be a lie. It would only serve to further his agenda of making me feel like the culprit in everything that I do. So, why am I writing about him? Why have I been thinking about him so often? He's like a walking nightmare I can't escape. My own personal version of hell. With that said, I must do what I do best. I must write about it. Get it out of my system before I lose myself to the darkness that continues to bud inside of my heart, spreading like a fatal disease. I just chuckled out loud a little bit. Have you ever been equal parts damaged and repaired? One part of you feeling so complete as if you can face anything, and the other side just hanging on to remind you that this could be the end. I feel like that all the time. Even more so now that I have cut all ties with the one I believed was the love of my life for so long. The funny thing is, I can't bring myself to hate him for all the self-torment he subjected me to. But then again, I can't really hate anyone for doing that to me. I've done a lot of the damage to myself. Before you write me off as just another professional victim, just allow me to tell my side of the story. Perhaps this is the most honest I've been in a long time. I'm not going to expect people to understand, but I hope they do. I hope you get it. Even if you don't, I hope you can pass it on to someone who will. 2. A little better. I'm going to tell you the truth because I have no reason to lie. My heart is broken. It was just fragile at first, but now it's completely in pieces on the floor. And where's the glue when you need it? For quite some time, I've lived in this world where love doesn't dwell. The kind of world that's dark and gritty, like an old black and white murder mystery movie. It's hard to say when it first started. Maybe it was growing up and seeing so many bad things happen to good people. Maybe it began to build within as I would constantly witness my mother being beaten bloody every other day. She loved him so much. Maybe that was the thing that made me decide that love just didn't exist, and if it did, it sure had dire consequences. You can call me whatever you want for that. For the most part, I've just been the weird kid all my life. But for some reason, everyone seemed to love me. Was it due to everyone realizing that my home situation was less than ideal? Perhaps. When I would go to school, so many people took pity on me. Because I'm such a pretty girl, they said. And smart, too. They all knew something that I didn't. Something that I was blinded from seeing. I'm sorry if it feels like I'm jumping all over the place. I just want to write the words as I feel them bleeding from this old heart of mine. It still aches. But I'm talking about the little girl. That miniature version of me was relentlessly pitied, only I didn't see the attention as empathy. Now that I look back through my little girl eyes, I see everything for what it was. All the sad looks and the whispers to other teachers that I couldn't comprehend, it all makes sense now. Well, mostly. See, I've lived in an emotionless world. I learned a long time ago that when you feel things, it only makes it hard to do anything. So I watched. I listened. I retreated so far into myself that I have a positive relationship with the voices in my head that tend to sound like other people. People that I like. People I can relate to. People who understand. If I'm going to be completely honest here, I have regular conversations with myself, even as an adult. I've been led to believe that it's healthy too. The voices didn't go away, even after I built positive relationships with people outside of myself. I wish it were true that they did, but that, my friends, would be a lie. Often, when I think of myself as a kid, I go back to the times after my mother left my first stepfather. Those memories are a little better. I was a little older. It's the repressing of those memories back then that have helped me to move forward. But in doing so, I think I may have inhibited myself. Those should come out too. 3. Safe. Now that I've kind of set the scene, let's bring out the 5-year-old girl first. I yearn to say that things were ideal, that life was just what you would imagine for a young girl just beginning her tender years. They were not. It's funny for me to think that I was once a happy baby, one so full of life. I can only really remember one main thing about that girl. She wanted her mother's love. There wasn't much that she wouldn't do to get it. But as life would have it, her mother was busy giving away all the love that was meant for her to someone else. Someone who didn't deserve it. I remember waking up in the middle of the night after a nightmare. The only thing on my mind was that if I could get into bed with my mommy, everything would be okay. I would be safe. The problem wasn't making it to the bed, though. I did that. The difficulty was staying in the bed. I don't think I've ever been shoved out of a bed so fast. That small child slept under their bed that night, too afraid to go back to the shared room with her siblings. It wasn't the last time she cuddled under their bed, silently sobbing in the dark. In fact, there were a couple of times they had sex right on top of the bed as she lay under it. The springs would press so firmly against her face, but she couldn't make a sound. Couldn't leave. A beating would have swiftly followed if she had even attempted to roll from beneath the bed. That's where her self-image began to deteriorate, when she felt invisible, unloved, rejected, as if nothing or no one in this world cared. They were all willing to let the monsters get her, and no one would miss her once they did. If I could talk to that little girl now, I would tell her not to cry. That girl would be wrapped tightly in my arms as I carried her back to that room and tucked her beneath the blanket. I'm not sure what kept me under that bed at night and the nights to follow. Perhaps it had something to do with the security that came from just being near her. The childish belief that the monsters couldn't see me if I were under there, in earshot of my mommy. It's apparent to me that it was around this time I was cursed with invisibility, something that is not as fun as they make it out to be in the movies. At least not when you want to be seen. So much so that it almost became a need. In the beginning, I took my invisibility in stride. I learned when and what I could get away with quickly, which wasn't much. Most of the time, I was contemplating how to avoid getting a beating. Those were some of my worst days. The only time things started to seem like they could possibly get better was when I was away from all of them. I'm 89% sure that's when I started to become a habitual liar. Almost as if it were just second nature. I did not find out until later that my biological dad was also a compulsive liar, and it leads me to think that lying is a genetic trait. Oftentimes, though, I was caught in my web of lies, and managed to talk myself right into more trouble than if I had just told the truth. My mother would tell me that line all of the time. But while in the moment, everything just sounds like an excuse for harsher punishment. 4. Move mountains. I spent a lot of time running away from home. Honestly, I don't remember what made me start running, but I would just wander off in search of something. Anything. It didn't matter where I was or who I was with. If at any point I was given the opportunity to break out, that's exactly what I was doing. There was this one time that I was staying with a family friend. It was supposed to be just for a night, but ended up dragging on longer than I expected. During my stay there, I came to find out that a woman, Mama Clara, lived in the same apartments, and I would much rather stay with her. It didn't take me long to plan my escape. I waited until everyone was in a sound sleep, and by sound, I mean the house was filled with the sounds of snoring and generational sleep apnea. The television had shut off for the night. Back in my day, TV would just go off air at a certain time, and it was pitch black in the whole house, except for the gray blur that illuminated from the TV screen. I listened for a moment, listening for the sound that someone may be awake in the living room. My little legs were shaking when I got up and made my way into the dark room, doing my best to be as quiet as I could. I'd almost made it to the door when my foot caught underneath someone and I crashed onto the floor, toppling over that person. With my heart racing and my head spinning, I ran back into the room and waited for the person to get up from the floor and come into the room to discipline me. Ladies and gentlemen, I was always in constant fear of being beaten. But nothing happened. Soon, I listened for the snores again, and upon determining that the coast was clear, I got up from the bed once again and made my way into the living room. This time, I was aware of the man lying in the middle of the floor, so I carefully stepped over him. The next obstacle was opening the door. How could I do it without anyone hearing anything? I fumbled around in the dark for a long time before finally building up enough courage to twist it and open the door. The night air was warm and humid. All I wore was an oversized white t-shirt and underwear. I'd left the door to the apartment open because I was too afraid to close it behind me. I still remember the smell of the pool that was directly in front of that apartment door. It glistened as I walked past it, determined to find where my Mama Clara lived. I may have wandered out there for hours. My feet were hurting, and I was just walking around in countless circles, looking for the door with the white circle on it. I had walked so long, I forgot where the apartment I was staying at was located. When I was ready to give up and sleep on the stairs somewhere, and I think I did sit down on the steps from pure exhaustion, I heard my name ring out of the darkness. My cousin found me sitting on the stairs, face resting inside the palms of my tiny hands, and took me to his house. I don't think I've ever been quite excited to see him to this day. I didn't understand what my cousin was doing outside in the middle of the night back then, but I was glad he was. That night, I slept underneath the warmth of the woman who felt more like a mother than mine ever did. I've suppressed that memory for about 3 years now. It makes me feel. That woman was so good to me, and she was biologically just my cousin. But she took me in, made me feel loved, carried me with her wherever she went. I loved her so much. It hurts the worst now that she's gone to rest, and I'm left with the memories of that little girl who would move mountains to be wrapped in her embrace one more time. 5. Called my bluff. I remember the first day of kindergarten like it was 20 years ago. Therefore, it mostly includes choppy pieces of a story that are hazy recollections at best. When I arrived to class, there were so many faces, so many children in bright colors. My name was already written on the desk, and I remember endlessly tracing it for most of the day with my finger. There were 2 teachers, a male and female, and both took turns redirecting me constantly. Even on days when I thought I was having a good day, something would always happen that would make me cross out one of my conduct stickers on the wall. I hated kindergarten. One thing I did like about it, though, was that if you lost a tooth, you received a lollipop. When I discovered that little treasure, I think I may have lost a tooth every other week. How? I found this piece of gravel that looked exactly like a tooth. I used it so frequently that eventually my teachers just gave me a lollipop if I promised to behave. The thing is, I don't think I was a bad kid, and at this point, I really feel like my teacher hated me. So, Miss Flakes, if you just so happened to read this one day, you should know that I thought you were the worst teacher in the world. I could never do any right in your eyes, and you made me hate coming to school every day. The good news is that my teachers got better as I got older. In first grade, I loved my teacher very much, and I can't remember for the life of me what her name is. By that time, I had already changed schools and moved into the house that eventually became known as a hell house. I may have gotten some of my worst beatings there. It was around the time of first grade that I began to learn the art of manipulation. There's something about being in physical and mental torment that makes you, want to get out of it. We changed schools a lot, though, so I'm not entirely surprised that I don't remember most of the names of my teachers. The only reason I could pull my kindergarten teacher's name out of a dusty old hat is because I disliked her so much. I remember being enrolled at the same school as my younger cousin at Tidwell Elementary. That school isn't around anymore. They tore it down. Undoubtedly because of the severe state of disrepair it was in. If there was ever a time I felt the sting of my poverty, it was when I was in that school. Even at 7, you know that a school is supposed to have working air conditioning and no leaks in the roof. That's beside the point. When my cousin and I were at the school together, it gave me a sense of relief. I loved my cousin, especially because she was naive and took my word for everything since I was older. We laugh about it now. I think I conned her out of her lunch money every day until I left that raggedy school. Sometimes I would tell her that because I had 5 pennies and she only had 4 quarters, I had more money than she did. Therefore, we should trade so that she would have more money than me. I don't think she'll ever let me forget it either. We grew up to be the best of cousins, although a little rocky at first. By rocky, I mean she punched me in the eye one time because I didn't know how to shut my mouth. I dared her thinking she wouldn't do it. She called my bluff. That was my first black eye, too. It was strange how my family worked to make each other tougher. Or maybe that's the way families are supposed to treat each other. I had interesting times with my cousins, to say the least. We would simulate a whooping, where essentially we're taking turns hitting each other, trying to prepare for the next one. The goal was not to cry anymore. We figured that if we could train ourselves not to feel it, that would make getting a whooping a lot easier to bear. That method never worked. We were always caught by surprise, and eventually my mother graduated from a belt to one of those black cable cords. One morning when I was restarting the 3rd grade, yes, you saw it right, I decided to skip the first day. 2 of my cousins, who were in different school districts, had come over and walked us to school, and convinced me that since I was moving anyways, I should ditch it altogether. I listened to them, and spent the day roaming around the neighborhood, just doing nothing. That was a fun day, although it ended with all of us getting in trouble. That was all right, though. We had our fun while it lasted. Come to think of it, I got into a lot of trouble with my cousins, too, but it oddly always seemed worth it.